What is going on, guys? Welcome back to Motorfest. In today's video, I do want to go over the best way to level up the Street Tier 1 and also the Tier 2 class here on the game, which I would say are probably going to be fairly popular. Mainly Street Tier 2 for that matter. Like, that's probably going to be one of the most used classes, at least behind like maybe Hypercar and Racing. But maxing out these classes, though, I would say is going to be extremely important. That way you actually have like a score breaker set for each one. We really don't know if they might actually add like different skills in the future that might only be tied to like one specific class. So having a score breaker for some of these is going to be very helpful. And that way you also don't have to worry about actually grinding out the classes later on. If let's say one of the summits have a really cool looking car, but you have to use something like a Street Tier 1 vehicle in them, and you most likely may not have any sets for it, it's probably going to make it a lot more difficult. And you may actually have to go grind just to get some of the part sets done. That way you can actually do the summits and go after some of those awesome looking cars. Now, if you are wondering, by the way, the Tier 1 and the Tier 2 class is going to be fairly similar for the most part. One is going to be a max level of 600, the other one is going to be a max level of 750, so they're obviously going to be quicker. And I would say that's probably going to make a lot of sense because, some of the cars probably shouldn't be in Tier 2, and I really do like the fact that they actually mix them up. Putting the regular, like, classic vehicles and certain cars in the Tier 1 was probably one of the best things they could have ever have done in this game. Like, certain vehicles probably do belong in their own class. Like, for example, seeing a 1970 Dodge Challenger go against something like a brand new Lamborghini Huracan probably makes absolutely no sense. Also, guys, I have to mention something, by the way. I'm sure I'm not the only one that has been getting annoyed. Why is the Tier 1 and the Tier 2 classes together? Like, I really do think they should actually separate these parts. That way you don't have to go over 55,000 different parts to get to the one you want. And if you did happen to do a lot of Tier 1 events or even like a bunch of Tier 2 races, you would have to move around and basically delete them. Of course, you also cannot change around different part sets like with a click of a button, like you could back on the Crew 2, so I really do hope some of these small features actually get added. For example, guys, being able to basically separate these parts would not only make this a lot easier to actually delete the said parts, but you can also add some of the vehicle class sets a bit easier to other vehicles, like you could back in the Crew 2. Now for the Street Tier 1 and the Tier 2, you could basically do most of the events around the entire map. Like for example, you guys can actually go around and do most of the events like the Vintage Garage, even the Muscle Car Tribute, and then head over to something like some of the main like Electric Odyssey events. Of course, head over to the Bike Lover races as well. Even do some of the Liberty Walk races, but the biggest question is though, is there going to be a really fast way to do this? And can you actually get the maxed out parts as quickly as possible? Now, a lot of this is most likely going to come down to the overall RNG in this game, but I would probably say doing many different events, you are most likely going to get the said parts you actually want even after a while. For me, guys, with the Tier 1 personally, I basically did many of the Vintage Garage events, and I did find a lot of those to be insanely simple compared to the others. And of course, that way you also do not have to mess with the AI, but if you really did want to, though, you can basically do any event of your choice. And I would say that's probably going to help tremendously with maxing out a part set in this game. Like, grinding the exact same event over and over is probably going to be pretty frustrating to do, especially going after multiple maxed out part sets. That's why for me, guys, with the Tier 1, I basically went through each of the Vintage Garage events, and then of course mix it up by doing some of the other ones like the Palm Springs Riot. Now, I have to admit, though, I ended up finding another event that's probably going to be one of the best possible ones you can grind out, and funnily enough, you can only use the Tier 1 and the Tier 2 cars in them. That is going to be located right here, guys, the Groundworks Liberty Walk event. Funnily enough, for this race, though, guys, when spawning over to it, you can only use a Tier 1 and a Tier 2 vehicle in this entire event, so you can't use anything else in this race like a hypercar. But what's actually going to be insane, though, is you can pick the exact same class twice. So for this event, which I find insanely amazing for actually grinding out part sets, is you will be able to use the exact same car for both parts of it. Which, if you are wondering, by the way, it's basically going to be one event, but halfway through you actually switch into the second vehicle. Funnily enough, you can actually use the BMW, for example, for both parts of it. That way you guys actually drive the exact same car the entire time. Now, when doing this event, there's a few things I did notice that I definitely want to point out. So for number one, the event is obviously going to be a bit longer. I did notice it's probably going to be maybe 3 minutes and 30 seconds to around 4 minutes, which of course in return does obviously get you a lot more parts. I do believe, guys, without a loot digger, you would most likely get maybe like 10 to 14, but I did end up running a loot digger set on this event, so technically there is going to be two events in one. Around 50% you basically switch vehicles into the other vehicle that you do pick, which if you guys did want to, by the way, you could pick two different street tier 2 vehicles, or you can also pick like a tier 1 vehicle and do two of those. That way you're getting double the parts from that set event, but I got around, as I did mention, 10 to 14 parts without a loot digger. I actually did this event again with a loot digger and I managed to get 24 parts from it, which by the way I got a lot of gold parts as well, so I would say this event is by far the best one to do if you are looking to max out the tier 1 and the tier 2 vehicles. Also a small mention, by the way, if you are grinding this out in the tier 1, do keep in mind it's probably going to take a bit longer than 4 minutes because the cars are slower, only doing around maybe 190 miles an hour on the highways, while the tier 2 vehicles can hit like 220, but that's probably not really going to matter when grinding out a lot of part sets. That way, guys, you actually get many parts from these set events, maximizing the entire time you're actually grinding out the classes to get the most parts as possible. And then of course this event is going to have AI, so there's only going to be 3 other races in it. Do keep in mind you also have to win this race, so second place you will also get nothing, which I would say isn't going to be a big issue with your vehicle being maxed out. But I did notice though, whoever's driving that Audi R8 in this event, that thing is absolutely insane. Which, funnily enough, many of the events I have grinded out, that car always seems to be the fastest. But if you really did want to, though, you can easily max out the Tier 2 and the Tier 1 vehicles by doing a bunch of random events around the entire map. But I have to admit, guys, the Groundworks event is probably by far like the most effective way to probably max out the Tier 1 and Tier 2 vehicles the best way possible.